Hello everyone and welcome to this video. In this video we'll talk about the hero's journey. I've long teasered this video and so now here it finally is. Now again, like in other videos, I scripted this video a little bit, so I'll read off my screen to some extent because some of you have asked me to do this to give my videos more structure, but I'll freely associate from at certain points of the video as well, so you'll get both the best of both worlds, that's to say. Now, let's start off with a brief introduction, and this will be here you get a taste of free association, I guess. So the hero's journey is a myth that, in my opinion, covers essentially the fundamental movement of the subject between the realms of heaven and hell that I've introduced in other videos, by the way. You can go check them out. One video is called The Three World Layers, and you'll find other videos adjacent to that. Now, the whole idea is that the subject, so the psyche, the human being, has a certain purpose in life. And this purpose in life is has been present throughout the existence of humans, manifested on this earth in this precise environment. And this existence is basically characterized by what I refer to as the transcendental movement. So the movement up and down the world ladder, through the three world layers, as you may have guessed. And these world layers are the heaven, the earth, and the underworld or hell. And essentially what these three world layers represent is the realm of the archetypes, the realm of the collective unconscious, that according to Carl Jung is the realm of sort of the father that we'll encounter again when we look at the hero's journey in particular. The earth, we'll get to in a second. The underworld is reality, so the world, the chaotic world that you all know from sort of the talks of Jordan Peterson, for instance, right? The chaotic world is the environment, the unencountered reality that is, in the end, determining the pathway into which, or the direction in which the heavens will unfold and develop. But the problem is that the heavens are essentially blind, right? And as are we, right? We don't know anything. We're not blind if we decide to see, but we're unknowing. We don't know. We're born unknown and unknowing to some extent, or at least as we're initiated into the ego, we come to not know, right? However, we're born into the structure that Jung refers to as the collective unconscious, that is the heavens, Jung being Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. And by being born into the structure, we are born with the burden of a responsibility. And that responsibility is not the responsibility of caring for our own lives, but the responsibility of continuing the development of the archetypal realm of the heavens, of God, of our Father, to be the seeing eye of the Father that we have been born from and that we live through. Now, what does this precisely mean, right? It means that essentially it is the human's quest to mediate between the heaven and hell, right? We see this very clearly in the images or figures of the I Ching. For instance, if you're interested in the I Ching, go check out my website, which you find the link to this in the description, where I wrote a book on the I Ching and sort of this gesture of mediating between the heavens and the hell as it is represented in the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching. Now, I also wrote a book, it's called Always Within and Never, where I talk about this indifferent of the I Ching, precisely this transcendental gesture. Now, the idea is here that basically the world, the mid-layer, is created in this process of mediation, in this process of migrating from the heaven to hell, in this process of the transcendental movement, as a liminal space through which we pass, attempting to make a reality in which we can exist at ease, supposedly. But it's a dangerous ease because it is neither in line with the heavenly realms, with the heavenly celestial bodies, if you will, nor is it in line with hell, with the reality, right? It's a fictional space. And this fictional space is precisely what Carl Jung referred to as the collective unconscious. Apologies. What Carl Jung referred to as the ego. The ego is the fictional space, the sort of narrative we build, the sort of story we build about ourselves and about the reality that we live in, that is a fictional interpretation of certain elements of the unknown reality of hell, and sort of attempts to be synchronizing itself with the realm of the heavenly celestial bodies. Now, I've made a lot of videos on the ego, so go check those out. I'm not going to introduce them in depth here, but because now we want to move on to the sort of hero's journey. I'm writing down timestamps for all of you who haven't watched videos before. So sometimes I'm typing, I'm not, sending messages most of the time. Typing timestamps. So to talk about the hero's journey, of course, we'll have to look at this book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Not because I think it's the best book, but simply because it looks at the hero's journey as a distinct sort of myth. It looks at it as a monomyth, if you will. But before we'll get to that, I would like to briefly relate this diagram that Edward Ellinger draws in his book Ego and Archetype to the hero's journey, The Hero with a Thousand Faces book that we'll sort of get into a summary of in a second that I'll read out to you, that I've written before this video and scripted before this video, so I'll read that out to you. But returning to sort of, if we look at this image, right, first of all you see circular movement, and what you see here, and I'll put this image in here at minute 6, add image from Ellinger. All right. So essentially what we see here is we see the cycle with Jung and also Ellinger, what Ellinger calls, according to Jung, the psychic life cycle. And this psychic life cycle is essentially characterized by sort of the process in which the ego, this mid layer, is always engaged in. And it's characterized by sort of the start at the original wholeness, so the wholeness of the ego and the self being sort of the transcendental objective core of the psyche. So essentially the self is the counterpart of the ego that we would consider objective. It is what we could consider God, right? The self is very much, to the ego, the self is very much what we would consider God, right? Now, this original wholeness is broken because there is a process of inflation. The ego always thinks, and I've highlighted this in many other videos on the ego always thinks it knows everything, and that's what we call inflation, right? The ego moves away from, and this is what I just said a minute ago, right? The ego moves away from the celestial bodies and thinks it can control reality without its help. It moves away from the Father, if you will, and thinks, the Son moves away from the Father and thinks, oh my God, I know everything, I'm so great. Now this is always followed by rejection. Rejection is essentially the cut, the scissor, in which sort of there's a cut into the ego's narrative, the ego's attempt to sort of raise itself to the level of God, right? This is what you have in the fall. It's what you have in the Tower of Babel. You have it in many of these stories, right? So this level of rejection is followed by a wounding, or a sort of a phase of what we would call depression, a descent into depression. But this descent is followed by one of two things, I would say, and I think it's wrong in this figure, right? If you have this down here there's simply a gap, it's the wounding, and then there's a gap, and you may recover. But I think there's a choice here, right? And I've highlighted this in many other videos. For example, in a video that I made on the fact that every action that we perform influences the world as a whole, right? And because here, basically, the idea that Ellinger puts forth is that we adopt, or the ego adopts, a sacrificial attitude, and this sacrificial attitude is the attitude that we have to let go of that which caused the inflation in order to then move on along the circle and sort of ascend again. Now, I think there's a choice the ego has, right? We can adopt the sacrificial attitude, or we can adopt what I would call sort of the Instagram attitude, which would simply be to say, well, I'm great, I'm just going to look for a new filter bubble that I can sort of move in, and that's not going to reject me, right? The ultimate goal of the ego being not to be rejected, not to be sort of ruptured, if you will, to live in its fiction, and to live out this fiction forever, which is precisely what social media is attempting to do, right? Or modernity in general, with political correctness and everything, right? Now, in any case, if we adopt this sacrificial attitude, there's a sort of metanoia, a turning going on that Ellinger suggests here. And this turning is essentially the idea that we have to adopt a certain humility, a certain repentance, right? Humility, repentance, right? And this is essentially, well, there is something bigger than I have failed, and now I have to look for the truth. And this look for the truth is essentially established in the process of a reconnection with the self. And automatically, through this reconnection with the self, the cycle starts again through inflation and so on and so forth. And so this is basically the reason why I'm bringing this up before talking about the hero's journey in concrete, is because it's so important to keep in mind that the hero's journey on the one hand is a myth, but it's a myth that represents a psychological reality. And just noting down a timestamp here. Man, there's so many timestamps in this video. Time's passing so fast. Basically, the idea here is that there's a reality to the hero's journey, to the myth of the hero's journey, that is psychological, right? We don't read the hero's journey simply as a collection of myths when we'll look at it in a minute, but I read it as the representation of the struggle that humans have been engaged in ever since humanity existed as humans, caught between these two spaces, attempting to create a world in the liminal space between them, right? So this is the way I want to look at you at the hero's journey and the myth of the hero with you. And again, let's look at this book by Edward Edinger, by Joseph Campbell, and so I'll read out to you what I've written about it. So at the heart of The Hero with a Thousand Faces is the concept of the monomyth, of the hero's journey. This narrative structure, which is proposed, is common to myths from cultures around the globe, consists of several stages that the heroes pass through on their transformative quest. This framework is not just a storytelling template, it is a reflection of the psychological processes that we all undergo in our journeys towards self-actualization and what Jung would call individuation. The journey begins with a call to adventure. The stage represents the moment when the hero is drawn out of the ordinary world and into the unknown, right? For many of us, this can be like this is like the spark of curiosity or the inner call to explore new facets of our own psyche, to venture beyond the comfort of familiar patterns. So it's essentially the call of the ego to go beyond that which it usually is, to go beyond the narrative, the fictional narrative it is built as its own identity, as its own, as I call it, narrative body. Next, we encounter the refusal of the call, where fear and hesitation can keep us tethered to the known, to the space that we have built, to the narrative body that we have constructed as a shell to keep us lured in our everyday lives and pleasures. This is a critical psychological moment where the ego resists the impending transformation, or the dawning transformation, I wrote. It is a natural defense mechanism, a reluctance to abandon the safety of the existing identity. However, it bears in it the threat of tyranny and the threat of the final refusal of the call, which will always necessarily lead to the hubris that we've encountered elsewhere already. The journey proceeds to the supernatural aid, where the hero receives guidance from mentors or divine figures. In psychological terms, this can be understood as the emergence of the unconscious mind, offering symbols, dreams, and insights that guide the individual forward. Or it could be, I would add here, also the appearance in synchronistic fashion of certain actual fundamental, manifested figures, like, doesn't matter what it is, could be an older person, could be a younger person, someone that encourages you or helps you on this journey that you're on. And I would say it's not limited to, or this manifestation, as we know, those unconscious manifestations are not limited to the psychological realm, but they can also be manifested in the physical realm. The crossing of the first threshold signifies the point of no return. This is where the hero fully commits to the journey, stepping into the new world with its unknown challenges. Psychologically, this represents the commitment to personal growth, embracing the uncertainty of the transformation, right? You always know there's a point of no return, right? You know there's no stepping back. And now, if we look at the Odyssean myth in Greek mythology, right? You have the call to adventure, where Odysseus leaves Ithaca to fight the Trojan War. And you have the refusal of the call, where he doesn't want to leave his family and so on and so forth, right? But then you have Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who aids Odysseus throughout the journey that he's on, right? Not wanting to go into this in too much depth. The first threshold is when he sets sail, venturing on the seas, which is followed, and then you have essentially here as the hero progresses, he enters into the belly of the whale, a symbolic representation of death and rebirth. Here, the hero undergoes a profound change, often facing the greatest fears of the darkest parts of themselves. The stage can be seen as a metaphor for the psychological process of integration, and so on and so forth. Integration of the shadow, that would be the idea of this belly of the whale, is essentially the idea of something that forces you to a metanoia. You realize there's something tremendous that is beyond you, right? You realize your own humility. You encounter that which you've been ignoring, let's say, for a while, and this can be on a personal level, but it can also be on a collective level. And of course, it always has a collective tend to it. The hero then embarks on a road of trials, encountering tests, allies and enemies. Each trial represents an opportunity of growth, and so on and so forth. The hero ultimately meets the god or the goddess, and attempts to achieve a unity with this divine or ideal. This stage often represents a moment of profound insight or realization, a psychological epiphany, where the deeper truths of the self are revealed, of the self with the capital S here. This is the Jungian self, right? Now, the idea here would be that essentially you always meet beyond sort of the supernatural aid in the beginning of the process, which is, that's why I don't like Joseph Campbell's book, because it's so unprofound, you know. It's like, yeah, the supernatural aid, you know, it's like yeah, but you know, what does this actually mean, right? And I think it actually means, and just like with this, you know, the belly of the whale means this phase of depression that we've encountered in Edinger's writing, you know, and the meeting of the supernatural aid can simply mean meeting someone or meeting something, seeing a sign, is something that prompts you to pass through the pain that the passage of the first threshold will, and the subsequent process will cause you, right? And this whole idea of the road of trials is also like, yeah, it's going to be a painful road, and you know, of course, it's formalized in many ways. If you look at initiation rituals, this road of trials is formalized in many ways, right? There's the blood, sacrifice of blood. There's water. There are many ways, many aspects, and many elements that are involved, right? But the meeting with the godness, with the god or goddess, is simply also, it's sort of this idea that at some point in this pathway, you must return or contemplate on the divine, the heavenly realm, right? Because the heavenly realm, the Father, that's what you're ultimately about, right? That's what it's ultimately, the process is about. And this doesn't mean the Father, your personal Father. It means a non-personal Father, a God, right? A God, properly speaking. And of course, then this is followed by sort of temptations. You have the woman as a temptress for male heroes, which sort of, on the one hand, is it sort of the idea, or stands in for distractions or temptations that can lead the hero astray. But it symbolizes internal, external forces that seek to divert us from our path, which doesn't have to be women at all, right? It's sort of here, it's really this idea that of pleasure that stands in the way of this path, right, of duty, if you will. And because the female actually can be a call to adventure, right? The anima, or supernatural aid, for that matter, the anima as sort of the guide also on the path, right? There are many myths that have this aspect to it for male shamans, for example, in their initiation. And so this is followed then by the atonement of the Father. So the reconciliation, the integration of sort of this lower function, the Son, into the archetypal, which is very much linked to the sacrificial attitude, right? The sacrificial attitude exists on multiple levels. It exists on the one hand at the beginning of the journey, where you sacrifice that which you have to let go in order to enter the journey at all. And then it's at the end again, in this sort of before the return, the idea that you have to sacrifice that which you found to the Father, to the greater good, right? And this is of course followed by and this is the gift you will receive, right? The ultimate gift, the virgin, the treasure, whatever you find, right? And of course, this is often or always followed by a return, and that's a return to mundanity, a return to the ego as the structure that you have to live through, right? The hero is only hero on this journey, but he has to return to the sort of to his ego existence always, right? You can't be hero all the time, right? So that's essentially the process of the hero's journey. And maybe to elaborate on this a little bit, and to also manifest this in sort of the practical life, right? I mean, again, I think it's not a singular journey. People don't have one journey in their lives. It's multiple journeys, and it exists sort of even on a daily level. It exists on a sort of a micro level and a macro level, and they're both embedded in each other, right? It's very clear that the process of individuation is made up of many of these circular movements, right? It's this constant transcendental movement, and that this can always be understood in terms of the hero's sort of the hero's myth. And basically what that all that is to say is that we're always engaged in a problematic situation with regards to the configuration of the ego and the reality and the collective unconscious that we're engaged in, and that as humans, and this is perhaps also the concluding remark, right? As humans, we're always caught in the struggle between these two powerful forces, right? Between these two realms. We're, if you will, we're puppets to some extent, I think, and puppets in a good way, not in a bad way. I think we're puppets in a very good way, and we have to play out that role and live that role, because it's the role that I think gives us purpose to exist in this life, right? Now, concluding this video, thank you for watching up to now, and again, if you're interested in this type of content, then please do subscribe. And also, do go to my website, check it out, and see if you find a book that'll maybe spark your interest. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.